Welcome to my channel, Comic Book Noise, where we talk about my comic book company, Digital Noise. But today we're going to do something different. We're going to go under the segment I created last week called Comic Book Issues. And what Comic Book Issues is about my rant and raves and my experience within the comic book industry. And today's subject under Comic Book Issues, Comicsgate. So the reason why I want to talk about Comicsgate is because of my experience I had about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it's in the video prior to this one, and you can refer to it. And I'll do a little summary of it now so you know where I'm going at with Comicsgate, I should say. Keep getting the name mixed up. But I posted a video 2 weeks ago, and it was on my creative title called The Positive Omen. And The Positive Omen is a superhero team where all the members are HIV or AIDS positive, and I created for HIV AIDS awareness. And so I posted it up in different Facebook groups that I'm a member of. And so I just mind my business, did my thing, and posted it up. And everyone's artistic and open-minded, or so I thought. And so it would be, people may have issues with the subject, and I know it's controversial because it's dealing with statuses of HIV or AIDS. And, I just know that whole subject is controversial to some people, and some people may not agree with it, and that's fine. So, to keep a long story short, somebody saw it, made a questionable reply on my post. I questioned it back. They replied something almost on a racial tone, racially back. I sent the information to the administrators, and I actually typed to that person, replied to that person, let them know that I did so because I suspect that was a racist, derogatory thing that they replied on my post. And I didn't think anything about it. I went about my day, and then all of a sudden I see a message in my Facebook Messenger, and it said this. And then so what I did was I posted what they put in my Messenger, and posted it up to different Facebook groups saying you need to be aware of this guy. He's a racist terrorist, and he's saying things to people that he doesn't know. And then I got a lot of feedback about this person, and they told me he's part of the Comicsgate. I wasn't too familiar with Comicsgate, so I didn't know what that was. More and more people started to tell me that this person was part of Comicsgate, and I had to look more into it. And I did last week I posted a thank you video response to everyone that came to my aid with the attack that happened to me in the Facebook groups. And and more Comicsgate members were trying to tell me they're sorry that this happened, and this is not what Comicsgate is about. And then they started to get questionable to me about who they were and their whole idea. And so I tried to understand what it was, and it just seemed a little questionable to me what Comicsgate was about. So when I started engaging with certain members of Comicsgate, and they were trying to tell me what it was about. And so what it seems to me what they are about is about forced political agendas and for great storytelling, and they're against forced diversity. So to me, it sounds kind of questionable of that foundation to me, because it just sounds very questionable, because when we had segregation not too long ago, and was it forced that we integrated different races to be together? So it was just something, that whole foundation of Comicsgate just sound questionable to me. So I had to, and they explain they're not racist. They have other all different types of races within Comicsgate as members. And I found out more about Comicsgate, that it's a comic book company that they put together. First it was a movement, and now it's an actual comic book publication. So, but it seems that Comicsgate is about upholding the old heroic ideals. And so I had to question, what are the old heroic ideas? So when I asked one of the members that I was replying back and forth with, he never explained to me what it was. So I was really questioning what the old heroic ideals were as a comic book reader, because that could apply to different opinions on different levels. So, but from what my stance is, and my knowledge, I wanted to invest more into look into what Comicsgate is. And so what I did was I just Googled what Comicsgate was or is, and the foundation of it, and how the origin starts. And it just got more questionable to me about what Comicsgate is about. From my own study of what Comicsgate is, that it was a bunch of disgruntled fans that were tired and exhausted of political agendas within comic books, and how they started, how the movement started of Comicsgate, from what I've read, was that it was a bunch of young ladies that worked for Marvel, was mourning the past of a female co-worker at Marvel. Well, I'll just read the article, and this is how it started.
Okay, now let's see what the Daily Beast has to say about it. We'll find out how the Comicsgate originated. So from the Daily Beast, it talks about how the title, it says, Comicsgate, how an anti-diversity harassment campaign in comics got ugly and profitable. And so you see the image says, come on everybody, as they're calling to for people to join a group or a gang. It says, in some ways it began with milkshakes. In July of 2017, 5 days after the death of groundbreaking comics publisher Flo Steinberg, a group of Marvel Comics female staff went out for milkshakes to celebrate her legacy. One of them, Heather Antos, at the time an assistant editor at the company working on the unbelievable Gwenpool, snapped a selfie of the group holding their sweets and posted it on Twitter. That followed was akin to a feeding frenzy. According to a local contingent online, Antos and the Marvel Milkshake crew were fake geek girls, just social justice warriors, and Tumblr virtual signalers. The sort of people who were ruining the comics industry by their very presence. The creepiest collection of stereotypical SJW social justice warriors anyone could possibly imagine. One user tweeted, musing on Antos' sexual availability led to another to write, better have her sign a consent form. She looks like the false rape charge type. While the staff and creators from across the comics industry rallied with a Twitter campaign to support Antos, the abuse continued. Much of it was driven by the goading of a single Twitter account, Diversity and Comics. run by Richard C. Mayer. The result swirl of recrimination from comics professionals caused a spike in Mayer's followers, thus setting a pattern many would come to regret. It was the first in many industry had heard of him, or of the Amorphous harassment campaign that came to be known as Comicsgate. And this is the picture that set all the comics that set off Comicsgate. It's very weird that this is the picture that young ladies that did like a Sex in the City type luncheon, or just going out and just to celebrate someone's death, not celebrate someone's death, but to be in honor of someone's death, that this triggered the comics book gate and their purpose. Well, let's proceed and move on. Geek culture has been rocked over the past 4 years by repeated outbreaks of reactionary hatred towards women and people of color, and Comicsgate is the latest front in that ongoing battle. Much has been written about it in the online press, and mainstream publications like The Telegraph and BuzzFeed have covered it. But to understand this latest eruption in the internet culture wars, or why the comics internet is currently ripping itself apart, you have to understand its context and the things that fuel it, the brands of cultural panic it feeds on, and the fact that it's pretty good to making people money. Comicsgate likely wouldn't exist without Gamergate, the harassment internet campaign, which in 2014 famously used and ginned up sex scandal and the premise of ethics in on-games journalism as an entry point for a sustained attack on women and SJWs that were held to be ruining the multi-million-dollar video game industry. Most of the women targeted were smaller critics or creators. Much of the harassment was gendered. Opportunistic figures saw a chance to build their brands by covering and egging on harassment. In the end, Gamergate never actually went away. It ascended, spread out, and it lit a series of brush fires in the pop culture spaces that are still smoldering. Few have been successful, but all have drawn from the playbook that Gamergate perfected. At this point, the rules of that playbook are widely and intuitively understood. Targeted harassment is hard to prove because few are stupid enough to explicitly call for it in a public platform. Plausible, deniably, is the name of the game, so is playing victim. If the targets responded to their baiting trolls, will often turn around and present screen caps of the encounters as example of people who can't take a joke, are hysterical, or fact harassing them. Sock puppets, fake accounts created to inflate follower counts or set up fake attacks on their operators are common. Everything drowns in a murk of confusion, and those attacked often struggling to describe their experience sound paranoid to people on the outside, precisely how troll campaigns like it. Everybody knows the score, but nobody can prove it. As with Gamergate, says Andrew Fargo, the curator of Cartoon Art Museum in San Francisco, much of the discussion around comics take place in a tangled online ecosystem in social media, message boards, and blogs, where trolls increasingly ran rampant. Some of these spaces flared up during Gamergate, but never quite evolved into their own movement. But with Trump's election and the resulting surge in alt-right and conservative boldness, Fargo says things change. More and more, my impression is that Comicsgate is made up of people who were into Gamergate things. Fargo said, Farrago said, and when they ran out of steam, they noticed that they hadn't made comics miserable enough for people yet. One of the facts that changed is C. Richards Mayer, the owner of YouTube channel and Diversity Comics. Mayer has spent so much of his past outside in the comic book industry. He served in the U.S. Army from 2000 to 2012 in Iraq, Afghanistan, and subsequently worked in IT, including at PayPal. His published works tend to have the military focus. In 2009, he published a black and white comic from overseas, No Enemy But Peace, inspired by the fellow soldiers in Iraq. In 2013, he wrote a comic about the Korean War, commemorating the Korean War. Sorry about that. Maintained a childhood interest in superheroes as well. While working in the Bay Area, Mayer told the Daily Beast he began noticing posters of Captain America in windows of the comic retailers. He was annoyed by what he considered the masculization of the character, by the way he felt Marvel was pushing what he considered an unsuccessful book. I started to notice how more weird stuff, he said. Feminization of men, masculization of women. Basically all the classic heterosexual pairings being destroyed. You realize that this is a trend and you start wondering why they're doing it. Why is Luke Cage I always have a problem with this word, the quintessential black exploitation tough guy? Why is he pushing a baby carriage and he's the wimpiest, most soft-spoken? This is not done by accident. And it goes on.
So you can see from that article that Comicsgate started from some young ladies from Marvel that were employees of Marvel, just got together, went to lunch together, and took it was almost like a Sex in the City type lunch thing, I guess they wanted to do with amongst each other, which is fine. I found nothing wrong with that. And they took a picture and posted it together, and this started the whole Comicsgate movement. Somehow someone found it to be feminist or pro-feminist for a bunch of ladies to hang out to lunch together and post a picture on Twitter or Instagram or whatever it was on. And it kind of boggled my mind, why is that an issue? I mean, if you see a bunch of male editors out together and taking a picture of it, does that mean that it's the chauvinist movement that they're trying to start? I did not understand why it started from there. But what the gripe is that they were tired of the number twos like Marvel or DC of pushing strong agendas within the comic book industry and the titles and the characters. They were a lot of fans were disgruntled, and what I understand is when fans complained about the changes, the creators didn't treat the fans with respect. They didn't follow the fans' wishes of creating their own content. So this was the start of a movement that is called Comicsgate, and it's I can understand customer and business. I can understand customer and business relations. So that part, but as far as creativity and And basically, comic book is a product, but it's also an art. You, how can I say it? Art is subjective. I guess Marvel, you have to actually think that Marvel had started with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and they had an artistic look on what they want to produce and put out. I don't think they started with getting or creating with everybody's input in their content that started Marvel, or even DC for that matter. Creation starts with the artist and their expression of what they want to put in that art. It's not to assuage or to comfort the audience. It's about telling a story for the audience. They're not copywriters for the fans to dictate what they should and should not put in their books. It's if the fans would follow what they would like, what the fans would follow of the stories that they tell and create. That's what art should be, and comic books is an art, basically. It's from a creative standpoint. And from my understanding of Comics Book Gate, they don't want strong political views, but their own view is strongly political as well. So they're pushing their political views on creative outlets. Yes, maybe Marvel or whatever publication could treat the fans more with respect. I agree with you there. There's a certain way that you have to deal with your customer, but you must kindly show the customer and treat the customer a way to that he can respect and understand where you're coming from. And it won't be by chastising a fan. I mean, if the fan is like a troll or something like that, that's a whole different matter. But if it's a really concern because the fan loves the character, you have to make them understand why there is change and why you just accept what we're putting out. In a kind way, not in a forceful, belligerent, dismissive way. There has to be a way, there's a fine line, because the fans is what makes you successful, Marvel, DC. So it's just, there's a certain moniker of respect that you have to give your fans, and I definitely understand that. But the fans need to understand is comic books aren't made for them to dictate. Comic books are made because the maker of the comic book wants to express their certain views on certain things and issues. Yes, it's a superhero comic book, but all comics throughout history has a political agenda. Even Superman has an agenda. From my viewpoint of what Comics Book Gate's agenda is to control and stifle other companies and tell them what to do with their own books or characters. And that's not right. We're supposed to be open to explore each other's vision, not our own. Okay, so you don't like this storyline of Captain America. Okay, don't buy those issues if you feels that strongly about it. Just write a letter to them. If they respond in a cool way, that's cool. But the comic book creator needs to express their story and what they want to convey to the audience. Because if you don't, no one will learn anything about anyone else's vision. Art won't grow that way. You won't see different takes on views that way. You can't. Because if you have the way of thinking of the foundation of what Comicsgate is, then everything will be the same. Everything will be stagnant. Nothing will grow. Nothing will happen. It just won't if you keep that kind of thinking against diversity and creation. For me, my standpoint is everything's political. If you express anything from your view, it's political. You have a political agenda because you want to force your political view on the other person, or you want that person to see your political view on things. So, to me, it's almost like a merry-go-round with the comics book gate, because now from what I'm understanding, I keep saying comics book gate because I'm that unfamiliar with Comicsgate, but the correct saying is Comicsgate. But from my understanding is that Comicsgate members are fighting amongst themselves. What they were actually fighting against, they're actually fighting against each other with it. And it's sort of like, hey, everybody just should be happy. And if you're not happy with content, or if you don't see content that you don't see out there that you want to see, you create it yourself. That's how creation grows. It won't grow with you dictating other people what their artistic view should be, because then it's not an artistic view. It's your dictator view on things that should be that they're creating, and not creating things that they want to express for themselves. Comic books need to change, and that's not diversity and politics is not the ruination of comic books today. No, it's the marketing of comic books, because comics has been going down for quite a while now, even before this, as Comicsgate tries to explain this SJW thing. It's been going down for a long time because the marketing of comic books has to be different. It just has to, because times are changing. Now we have video games, we have Netflix, we have other entertainment that we can go into that is outside comic books now that young kids can enjoy. Back then, before the video game world was huge, and the cell phone and all this other stuff that are rare, that will get your immediate attention, comic books was big. So now comic books and the storylines have to grow with the times. And now with the times, yes, you definitely need, on a consistent level, you need to have good characters and good storylines. I agree with that. I agree with that on that point on Comicsgate. But I don't agree with stopping the progression and the evolution of comic books, because old fans want to keep it a certain way. That's not the way to go about it. When times are changing, you have to change with it. That's good business. That's how it is. But it's also good art. And from my experience with Comicsgate, is their actual viewpoint is that they want to keep the heroic idea is to keep the white cis straight male to be the main hero in comics. Basically, that's what I'm getting from Comicsgate. And I think that that's an old boys network type of idea that actually Marvel had for a long time back in the day when I was working in comic books. And I saw the Old Boys Network. I saw nepotism. I saw overlooked people that were minorities that could do a better job than the people that were working above, that were Caucasian, getting work or getting a certain title or getting, things like that. And you also have to think with the idea of Comicsgate, their foundation is they're against forced political issues and forced diversity. Well, if you think like that, especially back in the day when Stan Lee created the X-Men, Comicsgate would be the X-Men, would be against the X-Men. Because the title, one of the most successful comics ever, is X-Men. So Comic Books Gate would be against that? I mean, just think about it. The whole idea of Comics Gate is against forced political ideals and diversity. That's what the X-Men are all about. That's why Stan Lee created the X-Men. The X-Men is a very political book. It talked about people that are basically marginalized and scoffed at in society because they felt like they were freaks, they were different, they were odd, they don't belong in normal society. So, and it had diverse people as the book progressed. That's how Storm came to be, that's how Thunderbird came to be. And then going forward, there were so many more minority characters created. There are very substantial characters within the Marvel Universe and even in the X-Men storyline. So, that would happen. And, as far as comic books are concerned, it's not about diversity killing the comic book. It's about creating good content that happen to be characters of diversity. And so I think there may be a mishmash of that in the industry, and I give you that. There have been some hit or misses within the comic book industry with those things. I won't mention certain titles, but recent titles that kind of were questionable. But you have to create good characters and good content no matter what ethnicity, race, or storyline it is. So, to me, Comicsgate is kind of, I don't understand. It just, to me, it kind of just is a segment for people who have an issue with people with diversity, which means to me, people that are racist, people that are sexist, people that are homophobic, have a certain idea of what a comic book should be, and they huddle together their own ideas of what they want to see in the comic book industry. And because it tells you right there, they don't want any politics or diversity that they deem is forced, but they don't deem their politics and their own ideals as forced, but which they're trying to force it. So it's a very double-edged sword on both sides of that coin. So it's just it's a very weird organization that is created within the comic book industry, or that it's a very strange movement that has been created in the comic book industry, and it just seems kind of apropos to the times of our leadership within this country. So It's just the force of the old boys. It seems like they want to keep the old boys status within the comic book industry, and not, they don't want diversity, and they don't want different races. They don't want different certain genders. They don't want different characters of sexual preferences. They don't want just a lot of the things that the world has today. So it's kind of weird and odd, and just to even talk about what Comicsgate is, because I wasn't familiar with it, and it's just a strange movement, and I don't think it's needed in the comic book industry. If you don't like what you're seeing, you just create it. You don't have to make a hate movement against another company's creative ideals. Just create your own comic book. Just get a movement to get together and create your own publication and create what you want. And so if it's failing, that diversity is failing, prove the company's wrong. Don't make a movement, because the movement is kind of suspect to me. Because let me tell you, my experience with the members that I experienced with was the first one that I experienced, because I'm creating my own content. I'm not bothering anybody. I'm just creating my own content, and I was attacked racially because of my comic book post from a Comicsgate member. And to me, that was my introduction. I had no agenda or no idea what Comicsgate was. I wasn't concerned. I'm in my own lane. I'm doing my own thing. And a Comicsgate member attacked me. So, and then as going forward and talking to some other Comicsgate members, it just seemed very questionable, because they were saying very veiled racist things like, oh, the comic book industry has destroyed the heroic ideal. And I'm asking, what is your heroic ideal? What is that? What do you mean by the comic book idea, the comic book hero ideal? So, but you got to think, but the thing is, white, cis, straight males don't have to fear their representation in the comic book industry. You have an abundant representations throughout the years in the comic book industry that has displayed the white cis male as number one, as the hero, as the most powerful, as the smartest, as whatever in comic book history. From DC all the way to Marvel to Image to whatever comic book company that's relevant today. So if a company wants to kind of spice it up with different races, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. Your representation will always be intact. So don't let your egos be deflated by if a female character of Captain America comes up for a few issues. She's not going to stay there that long. She's success. They're going to spin off her issue into another name. They're going to bring back the old Captain America. That's going to be fine. But just imagine you're fighting for your representation that you've always had, but a person of ethnicity like me, or another person coming from a different place that never saw their representation at all in comics, are finally getting their chance to see it. So why do you want to selfishly stop their looking at their representation in the comic book? I really don't understand that at all. Okay, so somebody else has a political agenda. You have yours. Why are you fighting with another entity that's creating their own content about their own vision of what they see and what they want to publish in their own books? I don't get it. You may not be happy about what they're publishing. Don't buy it. Don't support it. Create your own, which you're doing now, but you don't have to put out a whole hate campaign on other companies that want to strive and do different takes on storylines for their own books. I don't get it. So that was my rant today about Comicsgate. It's kind of troubling to know that there's an organization out there that's it almost feels like a hate group to me. Or maybe I'm getting it wrong. That's what it feels to me, because that's my first introduction of Comicsgate was a Comicsgate member spewed hate towards me because of my color and my artistic outlet. So that's it. Alright, so if you like what you're hearing, like and subscribe, and be careful out there, and take care.